The desert wind carried the acrid smell of cordite and jet fuel across. The 30mm rounds gleamed dully in the harsh afternoon sun, each one weighing exactly what freedom cost measured in ounces of metal and grains of powder. Her olive drab uniform was already soaked with sweat despite the early hour, and fine particles of sand had worked their way into every crease of her clothing, every pore of her skin. Preparing and narrating this type of story takes a lot of time and effort. If you like the story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to watch every story of our channel, turn on the bell icon. Johnson, pick up the pace. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos called from across the flight line, her voice cutting through the constant hum of generators and the distant thrum of rotor blades. We've got birds going hot in 20 minutes, and I don't want to explain to command why we're running behind schedule again. Emily's fingers never faltered as she continued the delicate process of feeding the chain-linked ammunition into the Apache's M230 cannon. Each movement was choreographed through thousands of hours of repetition, muscle memory that had been burned into her nervous system during the long months of training at Fort Rucker, then honed to razor sharpness during her first deployment. The ammunition belt snaked through the loading mechanism with metallic precision, each round clicking into place with a satisfying snap that spoke of machinery functioning exactly as designed. The ink had healed cleanly. The black lines now settled permanently into her skin like a brand of ownership over her own pain. Corporal Jake Mitchell approached with another case of ammunition, his desert boots crunching on the gravel. At 19, he still had the eager energy of someone who believed the war would end with clear victories and heroes' welcomes. "Emily, you ever wonder what it's like up there?" He nodded toward the Apache's cockpit, where the pilot and co-pilot gunner would soon strap themselves in for another mission into the hostile territory beyond the base's perimeter. Flying that machine, having all that firepower at your fingertips? Emily looked up from her work, squinting against the sun's glare. "I wonder about a lot of things, Jake. Mostly I wonder if the people we're shooting at have families waiting for them to come home." Her voice carried no judgment, just the quiet weight of someone who had seen enough death to understand that the enemy wore the same expression of fear and determination as the soldiers. Sleeping in the bunks around her, the base stretched out. Before them in all directions, a sprawling collection of prefabricated buildings, concrete barriers, and razor wire that had been carved out of the ancient desert like a wound in the earth's surface. Guard towers rose at regular intervals, their occupants scanning the horizon through high-powered scopes for signs of movement that might indicate an incoming attack. The landscape beyond the perimeter was beautiful in its harsh simplicity, rolling hills covered in scrub brush and stone, painted in shades of gold and amber by the relentless sun. Staff Sergeant Robert Chun emerged from the armament office, a clipboard in one hand and a lukewarm cup of coffee in the other. His uniform was crisp despite the heat, every crease sharp enough to cut paper. Chun had been in the Army for 12 years, long enough to develop the particular brand of competence that came from surviving multiple deployments without losing his sanity or his sense of humor. "Johnson, Santos wants to see you after you finish with that bird." Something about inventory discrepancies in the night shift reports. Emily nodded without looking up from her work. Inventory discrepancies were a constant source of tension, and the base ammunition was tracked with obsessive precision. Every round accounted for from the moment it arrived on the supply convoy until it was either fired in combat or returned to storage. The paperwork alone was enough to drive most soldiers to distraction, but Emily had developed a Zen-like relationship with the mundane details of military bureaucracy. Each form completed, each signature provided, each box checked was another small victory against the chaos that threatened to engulf them all. The Apache's crew chief, Warrant Officer Lisa Park, appeared at Emily's elbow with the fluid grace of someone who had learned to move efficiently in tight spaces. Park had been flying rotary wing aircraft for 8 years, first as an enlisted crew member and then as a pilot after completing warrant officer training. Her hands bore the permanent stains of hydraulic fluid and engine grease, and her eyes held the particular alertness that came from knowing that mechanical failure at 3,000 feet meant certain death. "How's she looking, Johnson?" "Clean and loaded, ma'am. 200 rounds of 30 millimeters, plus a full complement of Hellfires." Emily's response was automatic, professional, but her eyes lingered on Park's face. The pilot was maybe 35, with the kind of weathered beauty that came from years spent in harsh climates doing dangerous work. There were lines around her eyes that spoke of countless hours spent squinting into the sun, searching for threats that might emerge from the landscape below. Park ran her hand along the Apache's fuselage with the unconscious affection of someone who had learned to think of the machine as a living thing. "She's a good bird. Brought me home from some hairy situations over the years. You take care of her, and she'll take care of you." The pilot's voice carried the weight of personal experience, stories that would never be told in official reports, but lived on in the careful way she checked every system twice before takeoff. The call to morning formation echoed across the base from the loudspeakers mounted on every building. Emily wiped her hands on a clean rag and secured the ammunition bay, going through the final checklist with the same meticulous attention she brought to every task. The Apache sat ready for war, its angular profile cutting against the desert sky like some predatory insect carved from metal and composite materials. In a few hours, it would be airborne again, hunting for targets in the endless game of cat and mouse that defined their daily existence. As Emily walked toward the formation area, she passed the memorial wall where photographs of fallen soldiers were displayed behind protective glass. Each face represented someone's child, someone's hope, someone's future cut short by the brutal mathematics of warfare. She had memorized every name, every face, carrying their stories with her like a rosary of the dead. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn beneath her uniform, connecting her to the wall in ways that no one else could understand. The formation took shape with practiced efficiency, soldiers falling into neat rows according to unit and rank. Command Sergeant Major Patricia Williams stood at the front, her presence commanding immediate attention without the need for raised voices or theatrical gestures. Williams had been in the Army for 26 years, rising through the enlisted ranks with a combination of competence, integrity, and the kind of quiet toughness that earned respect rather than demanding it. "Listen up, people," Williams began, her voice carrying clearly across the formation. "We've got increased activity. In the northern sector, intelligence suggests a possible coordinated attack within the next 72 hours. All leave is canceled until further notice, and we're moving to DEFCON 2 effective immediately. That means everyone stays sharp, everyone stays ready, and everyone comes home. Questions?" Emily felt the familiar tightening in her chest that came with the announcement of heightened alert status. The base would become even more tense, more focused, more dangerous. Sleep would be harder to come by, and the weight of constant vigilance would settle over them like a heavy blanket. But there was also a strange comfort in the clarity that came with imminent danger. No more wondering when something might happen, only the certainty that it would. After formation, Emily made her way to the communications tent, where she had arranged to place her weekly call home. The satellite connection was unreliable, often cutting out in the middle of conversations, but it was their only link to the world beyond the wire. She dialed the familiar number and waited for the electronic pings and buzzes that indicated the call was being routed through a dozen different relay points across the globe. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was tired, older than Emily remembered. "Hi, Mom, it's me." The conversation that followed was filled with the careful navigation that defined all their communications, her mother sharing news from home while studiously avoiding any questions about Emily's daily life, Emily providing enough detail to seem forthcoming while revealing nothing that might cause worry or sleepless nights. They talked about the weather, about her younger brother's progress in college, about the neighbor's new dog. Normal things. Safe things. Things that existed in a world where people didn't load ammunition into attack helicopters or count the faces on memorial walls. When the call ended, Emily sat for a moment in the communications tent, listening to the electronic hum of the radio equipment and the distant sound of helicopter rotors. The tattoo on her shoulder blade itched again, reminding her of the weight she carried. Soon, she would have to return to the flight line, to the endless cycle of loading and checking and preparing for the next mission. But for just a moment, she allowed herself to exist in the space between worlds, remembering what it felt like to be someone's daughter instead of someone's weapon. The pre-dawn darkness of Forward Operating Base Viper held a different quality than civilian darkness. It was alive with purpose, punctuated by the red glow of safety lights and the soft murmur of soldiers preparing for another day of war. With its early mornings and late nights, her routine was sacred, unchanged for the past 8 months. First, she would sit on the edge of her cot for exactly 60 seconds, allowing her mind to surface from sleep and catalog the sounds around her, the gentle snoring of Specialist Rodriguez in the next bunk, the distant hum of the generator that powered their sleeping quarters, the occasional crackle of radio traffic from the command post. Then she would stand, dress in the same order every time, socks first, then pants, then undershirt, then uniform blouse, and make her way to the latrine facility for her morning routine, the face that looked back at her from the metal mirror. Above the sink was becoming a stranger's face. Her brown hair had grown out past regulation length, but the base barber had been killed in a mortar attack 3 weeks ago, and his replacement hadn't arrived yet. Her green eyes, which her mother had always said were her best feature, now held a depth that hadn't been there when she enlisted 2 years ago. The soft roundness of her cheeks had been carved away by months of military food and desert heat, revealing the angular bone structure that had been hidden beneath the last remnants of adolescent padding. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade was hidden beneath her uniform, but she could feel it there like a weight pressing against her spine. Sometimes in quiet moments, she would trace the outline of the design through the fabric of her shirt, 2 dog tags suspended from a delicate chain, with dates that meant everything and nothing. The first date marked the beginning of her story. The second date marked the end of someone else's. After her morning hygiene routine, Emily would make her way to the mess hall, where the fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh, unflattering shadows. The food was institutional, but filling powdered eggs, processed sausage, toast that had been warming under heat lamps for an unknown amount of time. She ate mechanically, using the meal as fuel rather than pleasure. Around her, other soldiers, engaged in the morning ritual of complaint and camaraderie, their voices blending into a familiar background chorus. Corporal Jake Mitchell slid his tray onto the table across from her, his uniform already showing sweat stains despite the early hour. "Another beautiful day in paradise," he announced with the forced cheerfulness that had become his trademark. "Heard we're getting a VIP visitor today. Some general from the Pentagon, coming to see how we're doing out here in the sandbox." Emily looked up from her eggs, her expression neutral. VIP visits usually meant extra work for everyone cleaning equipment that was already clean, rehearsing procedures that they performed flawlessly every day, standing at attention while someone in expensive dress blues asked questions about things they had never actually done. "Any word on who it is? Brigadier General Harrison, I think. Used to be a pilot himself back in the day. Probably wants to see the Apache operations." Jake's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Santos is already freaking out about the armament inventories. You know how she gets when the brass comes around." Emily nodded, already mentally preparing for the additional scrutiny that would accompany the general's visit. Every round of ammunition would be counted twice, every maintenance log reviewed with microscopic attention to detail. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to throb with awareness, as if it knew that extra attention might mean extra questions she wasn't prepared to answer. After breakfast, Emily made her way to the armament bay where she spent most of her working hours. The space was organized with military precision tools hung in designated locations, ammunition stored in clearly labeled containers, maintenance logs filled out in neat, regulation handwriting. This was her domain, the place where she had found a sense of competence and belonging that had been missing from other aspects of her military service. Staff. Sergeant Robert Chen was already there, reviewing inventory sheets with the focused intensity of someone who understood that minor discrepancies in paperwork could cascade into major problems. Johnson, good. I need you to walk through the night shift logs and verify every entry. The general's people called ahead. They want to review our ammunition handling procedures, and everything needs to be perfect. Emily took the clipboard from Shun's hands and began the familiar process of cross-referencing physical inventory with written records. Each line represented hours of work, rounds counted and recounted, serial numbers verified and logged. The mundane nature of the task was oddly soothing, providing structure and purpose in an environment where both were often in short supply. As she worked, Emily's mind drifted to the letter she had written the night before, another in the series of unsent communications that filled a shoebox beneath her cot. She wrote them regularly, always to the same person, always saying the things she couldn't say in any other context. The letters were her way of processing the daily weight of her service, the constant awareness that every round of ammunition she loaded might end someone's life, might make someone else's mother cry into a folded flag. Johnson. The voice belonged to Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, whose approach could be heard from 50 yards away by the distinctive sound of her combat boots against concrete. Santos had been Emily's supervisor since she arrived at Forward Operating Base Viper, a career soldier who had risen through the enlisted ranks with a combination of technical expertise and leadership skills that earned respect from subordinates and superiors alike. Yes, Sergeant? Emily looked up from the inventory sheets, her attention fully focused on Santos, despite the part of her mind that continued to tabulate ammunition counts. I need you to personally inspect every piece of equipment that the general's going to see today. Check it twice, then check it again. And make sure your uniform is squared away. I don't want to give the brass any reason to find fault with our operation. Santos paused, her expression softening slightly. How are you? Holding up, Johnson? I know this deployment's been tough on everyone, but you seem, I don't know, more distant lately. The question caught Emily off guard. Santos wasn't known for personal inquiries or emotional check-ins. Her leadership style focused more on task completion and mission readiness than individual welfare. I'm fine, Sergeant. Just focused on the job. Santos studied Emily's face with the penetrating gaze of someone who had learned to read soldiers like technical manuals. Look, I know we don't usually talk about personal stuff, but if you need to talk to someone, the chaplain, or one of the mental health people, that's what they're there for. This job gets to everyone eventually. Emily nodded, but her expression remained carefully neutral. The offer was genuine, she could tell, but there were some things that couldn't be shared with supervisors or chaplains or mental health professionals. Some secrets were too dangerous to speak aloud, too volatile to trust to official channels where everything was documented and filed and potentially used against you later. After Santos left, Emily returned to her inventory work with renewed focus. The numbers on the page began to blur together as her mind wandered back to the events that had led her to this desert base, to this job, to the tattoo that burned beneath her uniform like a brand. She had joined the Army for practical reasons: college tuition, healthcare, job training, all the benefits that military recruiters emphasized when they visited high schools in small towns where opportunities were limited and futures were uncertain. The practical reasons had evolved into something deeper during her months of training and deployment. She had discovered an aptitude for the technical aspects of her job, a natural understanding of weapon systems and ammunition handling that surprised her instructors and earned her rapid advancement in rank and responsibility. More importantly, she had found a sense of purpose in knowing that her work directly contributed to keeping her fellow soldiers alive. The weight of that responsibility was both burden and blessing. Every round she loaded correctly might save American lives. Every mistake she made might cost them. The mathematics were brutally simple, and they haunted her dreams with equations written in blood and measured in heartbeats that stopped too. Soon, Warrant Officer Lisa Park appeared at Emily's workstation with the quiet efficiency that characterized all her movements. The pilot's uniform showed the subtle signs of someone who had been up before dawn preparing for the day's mission. Small creases from sitting in aircraft seats, the faint smell of aviation fuel that seemed to permeate everything on the flight line. "Johnson, I need you to walk through the ammunition load with me one more time before we brief the general. He's going to want to see the entire process from beginning to end, and I want to make sure we don't have any surprises." Park's voice carried the authority of someone who had learned to make life and death decisions at altitude and airspeed. But there was also a warmth there that suggested she understood the human cost of the machinery they operated. Emily stood and gathered her equipment, following Park toward the Apache helicopter that had become as familiar as her own reflection. The aircraft sat ready for war, its angular surfaces painted in desert camouflage that allowed it to blend into the harsh landscape beyond the base perimeter. Every line of the machine spoke of deadly purpose, from the chain gun mounted beneath the nose to the hardpoints where Hellfire missiles could be attached like technological talons. As they walked, Park continued briefing Emily on the day's expectations. "The general's going to ask questions, lots of them. He's a pilot himself, so he'll know if we're giving him the standard dog and pony show. Be honest, be professional, and remember that we're representing not just ourselves, but everyone who's ever worn this uniform in this job." The words carried weight beyond their literal meaning. Emily understood that she was being entrusted with the reputation of her unit, her service, her profession. The responsibility was both honor and burden, adding another layer to the complex web of obligations and expectations that defined military life. They reached the Apache and began the familiar ritual of pre-flight inspection, checking every system, twice according to procedures that had been written in the blood of pilots, who had learned the importance of thoroughness the hard way. Emily's hands moved with practiced precision, her muscle memory guiding her through tasks that had become second nature. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, a constant reminder of the secret she carried and the questions that might be asked if anyone noticed the ink beneath her uniform. She had been careful to keep it hidden during medical examinations and group shower situations, but the possibility of discovery was always there, lurking at the edges of her consciousness like a half-remembered nightmare. As they worked, Park began to share stories from her own experience: close calls during combat missions, mechanical failures that had been overcome through skill and luck, moments of terror and triumph that defined the reality of their profession. The stories weren't meant to intimidate or impress, but rather to establish the kind of professional intimacy that developed between soldiers who trusted each other with their lives on a daily basis. "You know," Park said as she checked the tail, "rotor assembly. I've been flying for 8 years, and I've never had an ammunition specialist who was as thorough as you. Most people do the job because they have to. You do it because you understand what it means." The compliment caught Emily off guard, creating a warm glow in her chest that had nothing to do with the desert sun. Recognition from someone she respected meant more than she had expected, validating not just her technical skills, but her dedication to the deeper meaning of her work. "Thank you, ma'am. I just ... I understand that people's lives depend on getting it right." Park nodded, her expression serious. "Exactly. And that's why I wanted to talk to you before the general gets here." He's going to see that same dedication, and he's going to want to know where it comes from. Be ready to answer that question, because he's the kind of officer who can tell the difference between genuine commitment and military performance theater. The warning was delivered with kindness, but Emily felt a chill of apprehension nonetheless. Questions about motivation inevitably led to questions about background, about personal history, about the experiences that had shaped her approach to military service. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn with anticipation, as if it knew that its time of hiding might be coming to an end. The morning sun was already setting at 0800 hours, when the convoy carrying Brigadier General Marcus Harrison rolled through the main gate of Forward Operating Base Viper. Emily Johnson watched from her position beside the Apache helicopter as the black SUVs kicked up clouds of dust that caught the light like powdered gold. The base had been transformed overnight, every surface cleaned, every vehicle positioned with mathematical precision, every soldier pressed and polished, until they gleamed like advertising brochures for military efficiency. General Harrison emerged from the lead vehicle with the fluid grace of someone who had spent 30 years learning to project authority through body language alone. He was tall and lean, with silver hair that caught the desert sun, and eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of his surroundings with computer-like precision. His dress blue uniform was immaculate despite the heat and the array of ribbons on his chest told the story of a career spent in increasingly dangerous assignments around the globe. Emily felt her stomach tighten as she recognized something familiar in the general's posture, the way he held his shoulders, the particular angle of his jaw. But the recognition was incomplete, like trying to remember a dream after waking, there but not quite there, important but not quite accessible. Attention! Command Sergeant Major Patricia Williams's voice cut through the morning air like a blade, and every soldier within earshot snapped to rigid attention. The general's entourage spread out across the flight line, a collection of colonels and majors and civilian contractors, whose collective presence transformed the normally relaxed atmosphere of the base into something resembling a formal military ceremony. Warrant Officer Lisa Park stepped forward to begin the briefing, her voice clear and professional as she outlined the Apache's capabilities and mission profile. Emily remained at her position beside the ammunition loading station, her hands clasped behind her back in the parade rest position that had become as natural as breathing during her months of military service. "And this is Specialist Johnson," Park announced as the general's attention turned toward Emily's station. "She's our senior ammunition specialist, responsible for maintaining and loading all ordnance for our Apache operations." General Harrison's gaze settled on Emily with the intensity of someone who had learned to read soldiers like technical manuals. His eyes were pale blue, almost gray, and they seemed to see past the uniform and into the person wearing it. "Specialist Johnson, how long have you been working with rotary wing ammunition systems?" 18 months, sir. Since completing advanced training at Fort Rucker." Emily's response was automatic, professional, but she felt a strange electricity in the air, as if the general's presence had altered the fundamental physics of their environment. Fort Rucker. The general's voice carried a note of recognition, perhaps remembering his own training there decades earlier. "Good program, thorough. Tell me, what's the most challenging aspect of your job?" The question was designed to probe beyond surface competence, to reveal whether Emily understood the deeper implications of her work. She had prepared for this moment during the sleepless hours before dawn, rehearsing answers that would demonstrate both technical knowledge and professional commitment. "The responsibility, sir. Every round I load could save American lives or end someone else's. The margin for error is zero, and the consequences of mistakes are measured in human cost rather than mechanical failure." Her voice remained steady, but she could feel the weight of everyone's attention focused on her response. General Harrison nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that her answer had met some internal standard of acceptability. Show me your loading procedure. I want to see how you handle a full combat load from beginning to end. Emily moved to the ammunition storage area and began the familiar ritual of preparing a combat load for the Apache's weapon systems. Her hands moved with practiced precision, muscle memory guiding her through procedures that had been burned into her nervous system through countless hours of repetition. Each movement was deliberate, efficient, economical, no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourishes. As she worked, Emily began to narrate the process for the general's benefit, explaining the safety protocols and quality control measures that ensured every round would function exactly as designed. Her voice took on the cadence of someone who had found genuine passion in technical excellence, transforming what might have been a mundane demonstration into something approaching artistry. The general watched with the focused attention of someone who understood the deeper significance of what he was seeing. His questions became increasingly specific, probing her knowledge of ballistics, ammunition storage, maintenance schedules, and emergency procedures. Each answer Emily provided seemed to earn a small nod of approval, building towards some conclusion that remained hidden beneath the general's professional demeanor. "Excellent work, Specialist," General Harrison said as Emily completed the loading sequence. "Your technique is flawless, and your understanding of the systems is clearly comprehensive. Now I have a different kind of question for you." Emily felt a chill of apprehension despite the desert heat. Different kinds of questions usually meant personal inquiries, background investigations, explorations of motivation and commitment that could lead toward uncomfortable territory. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn with anticipation, as if it knew its time of concealment might be ending. "Yes, sir. I've been reviewing personnel files for all the soldiers on this base, looking for people with exceptional performance. Records who might be candidates for advanced training opportunities. Your supervisors speak very highly of your work, but there's something in your file that raises questions." Emily's heart began to race, but her external expression remained perfectly controlled. Military bearing was a learned skill, the ability to project calm competence even when internal systems were screaming warnings. "Sir," General Harrison pulled a manila folder from his briefcase and opened it to reveal what Emily recognized as her complete personnel jacket, every document, every evaluation, every piece of paper that the Army had generated about her since the day she enlisted. "Your initial aptitude test suggested you would be better suited for administrative work or communications. Your physical fitness scores were barely adequate. Your psychological evaluation raised concerns about your ability to handle the stress of combat operations." The words landed like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to strip away the professional competence she had spent months building. Emily felt her carefully constructed military persona beginning to crack under the pressure of having her deepest insecurities voiced by someone whose opinion carried the weight of absolute authority. "Yet here you are," the general continued, "performing at the highest level in one of the most demanding jobs in the Army. Your current supervisors describe you as dedicated, reliable, technically proficient, and completely committed to mission. Success. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident." Emily struggled to find words that would satisfy the general's inquiry without revealing information that could destroy her career. The truth was complex, painful, tied to experiences that existed in the classified spaces of her personal history, where official questions were not supposed to penetrate. "I learned that I could be more than my initial assessment suggested, sir. The Army gave me opportunities to prove myself, and I was determined to earn the trust that my supervisors placed in me." The answer was true as far as it went, but Emily could see in the general's eyes that it was insufficient. He was looking for deeper truth, the kind of honest personal revelation that could only emerge when someone was pushed beyond their comfortable boundaries of self-disclosure. "That's a good answer, Specialist, but it's not complete. I've been in the Army for 30 years. And I've learned to recognize when someone is carrying weight that doesn't show up in their official records. You perform your duties with the intensity of someone who has personal stakes in the outcome, not just professional obligation. The observation was accurate and terrifying in its precision. Emily felt exposed, as if the general's pale blue eyes had developed the ability to see through uniforms and skin, directly into the carefully guarded chambers of her heart, where her real motivations lived. Before she could formulate a response, the sharp crack of incoming mortar fire shattered the morning calm. The first round impacted 50 yards from their position, sending up a geyser of sand and concrete fragments that rained down on the assembled group. Emily's training took over immediately, her body moving toward cover before her conscious mind had finished processing the threat. Incoming, take cover. The warning came from multiple voices simultaneously as soldiers scattered toward the nearest protected positions. Emily found herself pressed against the Apache's armored hull alongside General Harrison, whose demeanor had transformed from inquisitive officer to combat veteran in the space of a heartbeat. The mortar attack continued for nearly 10 minutes, with rounds impacting randomly across the base in a pattern that suggested harassing fire rather than a coordinated assault designed to cause maximum casualties. Emily counted 17 explosions before the all-clear signal was given, her mind automatically cataloging the information that would be required for the after-action report. When the attack ended, Emily looked around to assess damage and casualties. Several vehicles had been hit, their twisted metal frames smoking in the desert heat. A supply building had taken a direct hit, its contents scattered across a 100-yard radius like confetti made of military equipment. Most importantly, she could see medics rushing toward the far end of the base where someone had been caught in the open when the attack began. General Harrison straightened his uniform with the automatic precision of someone who had survived similar attacks before. His eyes found Emily's, and she saw something new there, not just professional interest, but the kind of recognition that passed between combat veterans who had shared the experience of being shot at and missing. Well, Specialist Johnson, that was educational. Now I have another question for you. How quickly can we get these birds in the air to hunt down whoever just tried to ruin my morning? Emily's response came without hesitation, her voice clear and confident despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. 15 minutes, sir. The birds are fully loaded and fueled, and the crews are on 5-minute standby. Outstanding. Make it happen. Emily moved toward the Apache with renewed purpose, her earlier apprehension about the generals questions temporarily forgotten in the immediate urgency of preparing for a combat mission. Her hands flew through the pre-flight checklist, verifying systems and connections with the efficiency of someone who understood that speed and accuracy were equally important when American lives were at stake. As she worked, Emily became aware that General Harrison was still watching her, his attention focused on the subtle details of her movement and technique. But now his observation felt different, less like interrogation and more like evaluation, as if he were assessing her performance under stress rather than probing for personal secrets. Warrant Officer Park appeared at Emily's elbow, her flight suit already fastened and her helmet under her arm. Johnson, beautiful work. We're wheels up in 10 minutes. The general wants to observe from the control tower. Apparently he still remembers how to read tactical displays from his flying days. Emily nodded and stepped back as Park began her own pre-flight inspection. The Apache's engines were already spinning up, their high-pitched whine building toward the deeper roar that would carry the aircraft into combat. In minutes, it would be airborne and hunting for the mortar team that had dared to attack forward operating Base Viper during a VIP visit. As the Apache lifted off in a cloud of dust and rotor wash, Emily found herself standing alongside General Harrison, both of them watching the aircraft disappear into the shimmering heat waves that rose from the desert floor. The mortar attack had changed something in their relationship, creating a shared Experience that went beyond the formal boundaries of military hierarchy. Specialist Johnson, the general said without taking his eyes off the horizon where the Apache had vanished. I want you to think about something while we wait for our birds to return. The Army is always looking for people who can perform under pressure, who can transform themselves when circumstances demand it, who can find strength they didn't know they possessed. Those people are rare, and when we find them, we try to give them opportunities to make a bigger difference. The words carried implications that Emily wasn't sure she was ready to explore. Bigger opportunities usually meant increased scrutiny, deeper background investigations, more questions about personal history and motivation. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to throb with awareness, reminding her that some secrets were too dangerous to survive. Expanded attention from military authorities, but there was something else in the general's words, something that spoke to the part of her that had always wondered what she might be capable of if given the chance to find out. The Army had already transformed her in ways she couldn't have imagined when she first enlisted, teaching her skills she hadn't known existed, showing her strength she hadn't known she possessed, revealing capabilities that had been hidden beneath layers of self-doubt and limited expectations. I appreciate the opportunity to serve, sir, Emily replied, her voice steady despite the uncertainty churning in her mind. General Harrison finally turned to look at her directly, and Emily saw something in his expression that made her breath catch in her throat. It was recognition, not just professional recognition of her competence, but personal recognition, as if he were seeing something familiar in her face or her bearing, or the way she held herself under pressure. Specialist Johnson, I need to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it honestly. It's important, and it might be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. Emily's heart began to race again, but she nodded her consent. Whatever was coming, she would face it with the same determination she brought to every other challenge the Army had placed in her path. Have we met before? Before today, I mean. There's something about you, your face maybe, or the way you carry yourself, that seems familiar. It's been bothering me since the moment I saw you. The question hit Emily like a physical blow, confirming her worst fears about the direction of their conversation. The recognition had been mutual, whatever she had seen in the general's bearing. He had seen something similar in hers. The connection was real, dangerous, and impossible to ignore now that it had been acknowledged. Emily's mind raced through possible responses, each one carrying different levels of risk and revelation. The truth was impossible. It would destroy her career, possibly land her in prison, certainly end any chance she had of continuing the work that had given her life meaning and purpose. But lies were dangerous too, especially when told to someone whose job required the ability to detect deception. No, sir, she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. I don't believe we've met before today. General Harrison studied her face with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. His pale blue eyes seemed to catalog every detail of her features, searching for connections that existed just beyond the reach of conscious memory. Interesting, he said after a long moment. Perhaps it's just one of those things. You remind me of someone I used to know. Someone from a long time ago. The words carried weight that Emily couldn't fully decipher, but she sensed danger in the general's continued attention. The safer course was to redirect the conversation toward professional matters, away from personal territory where secrets lived and waited to destroy everything she had built. Sir, if I may ask, what kind of advanced training opportunities were you referring to earlier? General Harrison seemed to consider whether to allow the subject change, his expression suggesting that he wasn't finished exploring the mystery of their apparent connection. But professional courtesy won out over personal curiosity, at least for the moment. Special operations. Specifically, a new program that combines ammunition specialists with intelligence operations. The kind of work that requires people who can think under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and maintain operational security under extreme stress. The description should have been exciting. Special operations represented the elite tier of military service, the kind of assignment that could transform a career and open doors that remained closed to conventional soldiers. But Emily felt only apprehension, understanding instinctively that elite assignments came with elite scrutiny, background investigations that probed deeper than normal security clearances, psychological evaluations that might uncover truths she wasn't prepared to reveal. "It sounds like an honor, sir, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for that level of responsibility." Qualification isn't just about technical skills, specialist. It's about character, judgment, the ability to make difficult decisions when the stakes are highest. "Based on what I've observed today, you possess those qualities in abundance." Before Emily could respond, the distinctive sound of Apache rotors announced the return of the hunting mission. The aircraft appeared as a dark speck against the desert sky, growing larger as it approached the base in a direct line that suggested mission accomplishment rather than tactical evasion. "Warrant Officer Park's voice crackled over the radio system. Mounted near their observation position. "Viper Base, this is Apache 17, mission successful. Targets neutralized. Requesting immediate landing and debriefing." Emily felt a complex mix of emotions as she listened to the radio traffic. Relief that the mission had been successful, that the threat to the base had been eliminated. Pride in knowing that the ammunition she had loaded had performed exactly as designed, contributing to the successful completion of a combat operation. And something else, a darker satisfaction that came from knowing that the people who had tried to hurt her fellow soldiers were no longer capable of threatening anyone. The Apache touched down in a swirl of dust and rotor wash, its angular silhouette looking somehow different now that it had completed a combat mission. Emily could see scorch marks on the fuselage where hot brass from the chain gun had impacted the aircraft's skin, and she noticed that the Hellfire missile pylons were empty indicators that the crew had engaged multiple targets during their hunt. Park and her co-pilot gunner, Chief Warrant Officer David Kim, emerged from the aircraft with the characteristic swagger of pilots who had just completed a successful mission. Their flight suits were soaked with sweat, and their faces showed the particular exhaustion that came from the adrenaline crash following combat operations. "Clean kills on a 3-man mortar team," Park reported to General Harrison as she approached. "Their position. They were setting up for a second attack when we found them. Your ammunition performed flawlessly, Johnson. Every round went exactly where it was supposed to go." Emily nodded her acknowledgement, but found herself studying General Harrison's reaction to the mission report. His expression showed professional satisfaction at the successful completion of the operation, but there was something else there, a kind of recognition that went beyond mere approval of tactical success. "Outstanding work, all of you," the general said. "This is exactly the kind of performance that validates our investment in people and equipment. Specialist Johnson, your contribution to this mission's success was essential. Without properly loaded and maintained ammunition, even the best pilots in the world can't accomplish their objectives." The praise was professionally appropriate, but Emily sensed deeper meaning in the general's words. He wasn't just acknowledging her technical competence. He was recognizing her as an integral part of a combat team that had just eliminated threats to American lives. The distinction mattered more than she had expected it to. As the immediate excitement of the mission debrief began to fade, Emily became aware that other soldiers were watching their interaction with the general. Word had spread quickly through the base that the VIP visitor was taking personal interest in one of the ammunition specialists, and that kind of attention, positive or negative, always generated gossip and speculation. Corporal Jake Mitchell appeared at Emily's elbow with the eager energy of someone who had spent the morning safely inside the base perimeter, while others were conducting combat operations. "Emily, is it true that the general wants to recommend you for some kind of special assignment?" Creating stories like this requires extensive research and time to craft authentic military details. If this story resonates with you, please hit the like button and share it with others who appreciate military narratives. Don't forget to subscribe for more compelling stories. Emily felt a flash of irritation at Jake's assumption that private conversations with senior officers were appropriate topics for general discussion. But she also recognized that his question reflected genuine interest in her welfare rather than malicious gossip, and she forced her voice to remain neutral. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jake. The general was just asking about our ammunition procedures." "Come on, Emily. Everyone saw you two talking for like 20 minutes before the attack, and then he stayed right next to you during the mortar barrage instead of going to the command bunker where he belonged. That's not normal VIP behavior." Jake's observation was accurate and troubling. Emily hadn't considered how their extended conversation might appear to other soldiers, or what conclusions they might draw from the general's apparent personal interest in her background and performance. Military gossip could be as dangerous as enemy fire, capable of destroying careers and reputations with equal efficiency. The general asks a lot of questions. That's what generals do when they're evaluating operations. Emily's response was designed to shut down further speculation, but she could see in Jake's expression that her deflection had been unsuccessful. Staff Sergeant Robert Chun approached their group with a clipboard and the focused expression of someone dealing with the administrative aftermath of a combat operation. "Johnson, I need you to complete the post-mission ammunition report. Every round expended, every system checked, full documentation for the after-action review." Emily welcomed the assignment as an escape from Jake's probing questions and the uncomfortable awareness that her interaction with General Harrison had become a subject of base-wide interest. She followed Chun toward the armament bay, grateful for the familiar routine of paperwork and technical documentation. As she began filling out the required forms, Emily's mind returned to the general's question about their having met before. The sense of recognition had been mutual and immediate, suggesting a connection that went deeper than chance resemblance or coincidental familiarity. But accessing that connection required her to explore memories she had spent months trying to bury, experiences that belonged to the classified chambers of her personal history, where official inquiries were forbidden to penetrate. The tattoo on her shoulder blade seemed to burn with renewed intensity, as if the general's presence had awakened something that had been dormant beneath her carefully constructed military persona. She found herself unconsciously rubbing the spot where the ink lay hidden beneath her uniform, tracing the outline of the dog tags and dates that meant everything to her, and nothing to anyone else who might glimpse them. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos entered the armament bay with the purposeful stride of someone who had been looking for Emily specifically. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Emily had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when Santos was dealing with sensitive information that couldn't be discussed openly. "Johnson, the general wants to see you again before he leaves. He's in the command post with the colonel, reviewing today's operations. You're to report there immediately." Santos paused, her voice dropping to a more personal register. "And Johnson? Whatever this is about, be careful. Generals don't usually take personal interest in individual specialists unless something unusual is going on." The warning was delivered with genuine concern, but it only increased Emily's apprehension about what the second meeting might involve. Her first interaction with General Harrison had been professionally appropriate, despite its personal undertones, but she sensed that their next conversation would probe deeper into territory she wasn't prepared to explore. Emily made her way across the base toward the command post, her mind racing through possible explanations for the general's continued interest. The most dangerous possibility was that he had somehow connected her current identity with her previous life, bridging the gap that she had worked so hard to create and maintain. But there were other possibilities, special assignment opportunities, Security investigations, routine follow-up questions that had nothing to do with personal recognition. The command post was a fortress of sandbags and reinforced concrete. Its interior dominated by radio equipment, tactical displays, and the constant buzz of electronic communication with higher headquarters. Emily reported to the duty officer, who directed her toward a small conference room where General Harrison waited alongside Colonel Patricia Martinez, the base commander. "Specialist Johnson, please have a seat," Colonel Martinez said, indicating a metal folding chair positioned across from the two senior officers. "General Harrison has some additional questions for you, and I wanted to be present for this conversation." Emily sat down carefully, her posture automatically adjusting to the rigid attention position that had become second nature during her months of military service. The presence of the base commander suggested that whatever was about to be discussed had implications that went beyond routine performance evaluation. General Harrison opened the same manila folder that had contained her personnel records. But this time Emily could see additional documents that hadn't been there before, papers with official seals and classification markings that indicated they had been retrieved from sources that required special authorization to access. "Specialist Johnson, I've been doing some additional research into your background, and I've discovered some interesting information that raises questions about your initial enlistment application." The general's voice was carefully controlled, professionally neutral, but Emily could hear the underlying tension that suggested he had found exactly what he had been looking for. Emily's heart began to race, but her external expression remained perfectly composed. This was the moment she had been dreading since the day she enlisted, the inevitable confrontation between her carefully constructed new identity and the dangerous truths of her previous life. "Sir, according to your enlistment paperwork, you listed your father as deceased and provided a death certificate from the state of Colorado. However, my staff has been unable to verify that death certificate through normal channels, and there are some discrepancies in the documentation that suggest it may not be authentic." The words hit Emily like physical blows, each one carefully chosen to dismantle the protective barriers she had built around her true identity. She had known that forged documents carried risks, but she had believed that military recruiters would accept them at face value rather than conducting detailed background investigations on every potential enlistment. "I provided the documentation I had available, sir. If there are problems with the paperwork, it may be due to errors at the state level rather than intentional deception on my part." General Harrison studied her face with the intensity of someone who had spent decades learning to distinguish truth from carefully constructed lies. "That's possible, Specialist. But there's another issue that complicates this situation significantly." Emily waited, her mind racing through worst-case scenarios while her external demeanor remained professionally composed. Whatever the general had discovered, she would face it with the same determination she brought to every other challenge the Army had placed in her path. "My staff contacted the Social Security Administration to verify your identity information, and they found something very interesting. According to their records, Emily Johnson, the Emily Johnson whose identity you're using, died in a car accident in Colorado Springs 3 years ago." The silence in the command post conference room stretched like a taut wire, each second adding weight to the revelation that hung between Emily and the two senior officers. The air conditioning hummed steadily, but Emily could feel sweat beginning to form along her hairline, despite the controlled environment. Her carefully constructed identity, the foundation upon which she had built her entire military career, lay in ruins on the table before them, exposed by the kind of thorough investigation that she had always feared, but never quite believed would happen. General Harrison's pale blue eyes never wavered from her face, studying her reaction with the clinical precision of someone who had learned to read human nature like a technical manual. Colonel Martinez sat silently beside him, her expression unreadable but her posture suggesting that she was prepared for whatever explosive revelation might emerge from this conversation. Specialist Johnson, the general continued, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority, or perhaps I should say, the person who has been using Emily Johnson's identity for the past 2 years. I need you to understand that falsifying enlistment documents is a federal crime, punishable by court-martial, dishonorable discharge, and significant prison time. However, before we proceed with any formal charges, I want to give you an opportunity to explain how and why you came to be serving in the United States Army under a dead woman's name. Emily's mind raced through possible responses, each one carrying different levels of risk and revelation. Complete honesty would almost certainly result in her immediate arrest and the destruction of everything she had worked to build, but continued. Deception seemed equally futile if the general staff had already uncovered her false identity. They were certainly capable of discovering the truth behind it. The tattoo on her left shoulder blade seemed to burn with anticipation, as if it knew that its time of concealment was finally ending. The dog tags and dates inked into her skin told a story that she had never been able to share with anyone, a truth so dangerous that she had been willing to commit federal crimes rather than speak it aloud. "Sir," Emily began, her voice steady, despite the chaos in her mind, "I need you to understand that I never intended to deceive the Army or to take advantage of anyone. Everything I've done since enlisting has been in service to this country and to the soldiers who depend on me. My performance records speak to my commitment and competence, regardless of what name appears on my personnel file." General Harrison nodded slowly, his expression suggesting that her response had met some minimum standard of acceptability without fully satisfying his need for truth. "That's all very admirable, Specialist, but it doesn't answer my question. Who are you really? And why did you feel it necessary to steal a dead woman's identity in order to serve your country?" The question cut to the heart of everything Emily had been trying to protect, the dangerous secret that connected her current life to experiences that existed in the classified spaces of her memory. She could feel the weight of both officers. Attention focused on her like a laser, demanding truth that she wasn't sure she was prepared to provide. "My real name is Sarah Elizabeth Harrison," Emily said finally, the words emerging from her throat like shards of broken glass. "And I believe you might be my father." The revelation hit the room like a physical explosion, transforming the controlled, professional atmosphere into something electric and dangerous. General Harrison's composed expression cracked for the first time since Emily had met him, revealing something raw and vulnerable beneath the polished surface of his military bearing. Colonel Martinez leaned forward in her chair, her eyes wide with surprise and concern. "Jesus Christ. Are you telling me that this soldier has been serving under your nose for God knows how long, and you never recognized your own daughter?" "General." Harrison's voice, when he found it again, was hoarse with emotion. "Sarah died 3 years ago. Car accident in Colorado Springs. I went to the funeral. I watched them lower her casket into the ground." His eyes never left Emily's face, searching for confirmation or denial of what seemed impossible to accept. "You went to Emily Johnson's funeral," Emily corrected gently. "Emily was my best friend. She was driving my car when the accident happened, and the bodies were damaged enough that positive identification required dental records. I was supposed to be in that car, Dad. Emily died because she was trying to help me escape from something that would have killed me if I'd stayed." The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, gradually clarifying into a picture that was both more complex and more tragic than anyone in the room had anticipated. Emily could see recognition beginning to dawn in her father's eyes, not just the familiar features that had been nagging at his subconscious, but the deeper understanding of who she had become and why she had needed to disappear. "What were you running from?" Colonel Martinez asked, her voice gentle but insistent. "What could have been so dangerous that you felt the need to fake your own death and steal your best friend's identity?" Emily looked at her father, searching his face for some indication of how much truth he was prepared to hear. The story she was about to tell would not just explain her deception, but reveal failures and compromises that would be difficult for a career military officer to accept. I was married to Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb. Dad, you remember him. You performed the ceremony at the base chapel when I was 19. What you didn't know was that Marcus had problems. Anger problems. Control problems. Problems that got worse after his deployment to Afghanistan left him with PTSD that he refused to acknowledge or treat. General Harrison's expression darkened as he began to understand the direction of her story. Domestic violence in military families was a persistent problem that the Army had been struggling to address for decades, but it remained largely hidden beneath the surface of official reports and statistics. He hit you. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, delivered with the flat certainty of someone who had seen enough of the world to recognize the patterns of human suffering. He did more than hit me, Dad. He isolated me from friends and family, controlled every aspect of my daily life, threatened to kill me if I ever tried to leave him. And because he was active duty Army and I was a dependent spouse living on base, the people I might have turned to for help were his colleagues and friends. The system that was supposed to protect me was the same system that protected him. Emily could see the pain in her father's eyes as he processed the implications of her words. As a senior military officer, he had spent decades working within the system she was describing, believing in its fundamental integrity and commitment to protecting the vulnerable. Learning that it had failed his own daughter so completely was clearly devastating. "Why didn't you come to me?" General Harrison asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I would have moved heaven and earth to protect you. I would have destroyed anyone who tried to hurt you." Emily felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back through sheer willpower. This conversation was too important to be derailed by emotional breakdown, no matter how justified those emotions might be. Because Marcus made it clear that he had friends throughout the chain of command, people who would make sure that any complaints I filed would disappear into administrative black holes. And because he told me that if I involved family members in our private business, he would make sure they suffered the consequences along with me. The words came out in a rush, 2 years of suppressed truth finally finding expression in the quote, "safety of official interrogation." Emily could feel the weight of secrets lifting from her shoulders, even as she understood that the truth might destroy everything she had worked to rebuild. Colonel Martinez reached across the table and placed a gentle hand on Emily's arm. "Sarah or Emily, whichever you prefer, you need to understand that what you're describing constitutes criminal behavior that should have been prosecuted to the full extent of military law. If what you're telling us is true, then the system failed you in ways that are completely unacceptable." "The system didn't fail me, ma'am. People within the system failed me. But the Army itself, the institution, the mission, the commitment to protecting innocent people, that's what I've been serving for the past 2 years. That's why I was willing to risk everything to find a way to contribute to something larger than my own problems." Emily could see her father processing this distinction, recognizing the subtle but important difference between individual failures and institutional corruption. As a senior officer, he had built his career on the belief that the Army could be reformed and improved through the efforts of dedicated professionals committed to doing the right thing. "What happened to Marcus?" General Harrison asked, his voice carrying undertones that suggested he was prepared to hear the worst possible. "Answer: he's dead, Dad. Killed in action during his second deployment to Afghanistan, about 6 months after I disappeared." Emily and I had been planning our escape for weeks when we heard that his unit was being deployed again. We thought we had time to establish new identities and disappear while he was overseas. But he came home on emergency leave unexpectedly, and we had to accelerate our timeline. Emily paused, gathering strength for the most difficult part of her story. Emily was driving to the Social Security office with documents we needed to complete the identity switch when the accident happened. She was killed instantly, and because she was driving my car and carrying my identification, everyone assumed that I was the one who died. It seemed like a sign, a chance to honor her sacrifice by using the identity she had helped me create. The conference room fell silent again as the three officers processed the full scope of what Emily had revealed. Her story explained not just the false identity, but the deeper motivations that had driven her to seek military service despite the trauma she had experienced within military culture. The tattoo, General Harrison said suddenly, understanding dawning in his expression. You have a tattoo, don't you? Something that commemorates Emily's sacrifice. Emily nodded, her hand unconsciously moving toward her left shoulder blade. 2 dog tags with our birth dates. Emily's and mine. A reminder that she gave her life so that I could have a chance to become someone new. Colonel Martinez leaned back in her chair, her expression mixing admiration with professional concern. Sarah, what you've accomplished over the past 2 years is remarkable. You've not only rebuilt your life but excelled in one of the most demanding jobs in the Army. However, the legal complications of your situation are extremely serious. Falsifying enlistment documents, identity theft, fraud, these are charges that could result in decades of prison time. I understand, ma'am. I've always known that discovery would mean the end of everything I've built. But I also know that I've served with honor and distinction, that I've contributed to mission success and soldier safety in ways that have nothing to do with what name appears on my personnel file. General Harrison stood and walked to the window, staring out at the desert landscape where his daughter, returned from the dead, had been loading ammunition for combat aircraft just hours earlier. His shoulders carried the weight of 30 years of military leadership. But Emily could see that this personal revelation had added a burden that was qualitatively different from anything he had carried before. There are options, he said finally, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had learned to find solutions to impossible problems. Legal options that could address the documentation issues while recognizing your exceptional service record. It would require coordination with multiple agencies, congressional intervention, possibly even a presidential pardon. But it's not impossible. Emily felt a spark of hope that she hadn't allowed herself to experience since the moment General Harrison had first looked at her with recognition. The possibility that she might be able to continue serving, to maintain the life she had built on the foundation of Emily Johnson's sacrifice, seemed almost too good to believe. What would that require, sir? Complete honesty about everything. That happened, cooperation with investigations into Marcus Webb's network of supporters who enabled his abuse, and probably testimony before congressional committees that are examining military family violence policies. It would mean becoming a public face for reform efforts, using your story to prevent other victims from suffering the way you did. The prospect was both exciting and terrifying. Emily had spent 2 years learning to blend into the background, to excel without attracting attention, to serve effectively while maintaining the anonymity that protected her reconstructed identity. Becoming a public advocate would require her to abandon that anonymity permanently, to accept exposure and scrutiny as the price of continued service. I need time to think about it, Emily said finally. General Harrison turned back toward her, and for the first time since their conversation began, she saw him not as a senior military officer, but as a father who had just learned that his daughter was alive. Take all the time you need, Sarah. But understand that you don't have to face this alone anymore. Whatever you decide, whatever path you choose, you have family support now. Colonel Martinez cleared her throat diplomatically. I think this conversation has covered enough ground for one day. Sarah, you're to remain on base pending further investigation, but you'll continue with your normal duties unless specifically instructed otherwise. General Harrison, I assume you'll be extending your visit to deal with this situation? Yes, I'll need to make several phone calls to Washington, but this takes priority over any other business I might have." General Harrison's voice carried the determination of someone who had found a mission that transcended normal military priorities. As they prepared to leave the conference room, Emily felt the weight of revelation settling over her like a new uniform, heavier than what she had worn before, but somehow more honest, more authentic. The secret that had defined her existence for 2 years was finally in the open, and while the consequences remained uncertain, she no longer had to carry the burden alone. The tattoo on her shoulder blade no longer burned with hidden significance. Instead, it felt like what it had always been intended to be, a memorial to friendship and sacrifice. A reminder that some gifts are too precious to be wasted on fear. 6 months after the revelation in the command post conference room, Emily Johnson, legally Sarah Elizabeth Harrison, once again stood before a joint session of the House and Senate Armed Services Committees in the Hart Senate Office Building. The hearing room was packed with reporters, military officials, and advocates for domestic violence reform, their collective attention focused on the woman whose story had become a catalyst for sweeping changes in military family policy. The transformation had been remarkable and exhausting. What began as a personal confession in a desert command post had evolved into a federal investigation that exposed a network of military personnel who had systematically covered up domestic violence cases, protected abusive spouses, and intimidated victims into silence. Emily's case had been the key that unlocked a pattern of institutional failure, spanning multiple bases and affecting hundreds of military families. "Ms. Harrison," Senator Patricia Morrison began, her voice carrying the gravity appropriate to the moment. "Your testimony has been extraordinarily valuable in helping us understand how our military justice system failed to protect you and so many others. Can you tell us about the changes you've observed during your continued service over the past 6 months?" Emily adjusted the microphone before her, acutely aware that her words would be transmitted across the nation and around the world. She wore her dress blue uniform with the ribbons and insignia that reflected her true service record, including a bronze star for her actions during the mortar attack that had brought her father to Forward Operating Base Viper. "Senator, the changes have been comprehensive and meaningful. New protocols require domestic violence reports to be investigated by personnel outside the accused chain of command. Victim advocates now have direct access to congressional representatives and inspector general offices. Most importantly, there's been a cultural shift. Soldiers are beginning to understand that protecting families is just as important as protecting the nation." Representative James Chun leaned forward in his chair, his expression reflecting the seriousness of the issues under discussion. "Ms. Harrison, you chose to continue serving in the Army after your true identity was revealed. Can you explain why you made that decision, especially given the trauma you experienced within the military system?" Emily had prepared for this question, but the answer still required her to access emotions that remained raw despite months of counseling and healing. "Congressman, I learned to distinguish between the individuals who failed me and the institution they were supposed to represent. The Army's mission, protecting innocent people, defending freedom, serving something larger than ourselves, that mission is still worth serving. The problem was never the Army's values. It was people who betrayed those values and got away with it." Her father sat in the front row of the gallery, his dress blue uniform identical to hers, except for the stars on his shoulders that reflected 32 years of service. Their relationship was still rebuilding, still navigating the complex intersection of personal family dynamics and professional military hierarchy. But there was love there now, open and acknowledged, no longer hidden beneath layers of assumed loss and protective distance. General Harrison had become one of the leading advocates for military family protection reform, using his position and influence to push through changes that would have taken decades to accomplish through normal bureaucratic channels. His advocacy had cost him politically, some of his peers viewed his personal involvement in the issue as compromising his objectivity, but he had made peace with the career implications of doing what he believed was right. The hearing continued for 3 hours, with Emily answering questions about policy recommendations, implementation challenges, and the ongoing investigation into the network of personnel who had enabled Marcus Webb's abuse. Each answer was carefully considered, designed to advance the cause of reform while avoiding any statements that might compromise ongoing criminal prosecutions. During a recess, Emily stepped outside the hearing room where Warrant Officer Lisa Park waited with the patient expression of someone who had learned to navigate the controlled chaos of Washington politics. Park had been promoted to Chief Warrant Officer and transferred to the Pentagon, where she served as a liaison between operational units and the policy development teams, working on military family issues. "How are you holding up?" Park asked, her voice carrying the same warmth that had made her such an effective leader in combat situations. "Better than I expected. It's strange, being the center of attention instead of trying to blend into the background. But if my story can prevent other women from going through what I experienced, then it's worth the discomfort." Park nodded, understanding the complex mix of exposure and empowerment that defined Emily's new role. "The changes are already making a difference. We've had more domestic violence reports in the past 6 months than in the previous 2 years combined. That's not because there's more abuse, it's because people finally believe they'll be protected if they come forward." The conversation was interrupted by the approach of Dr. Rebecca Martinez, a civilian psychologist who had been working with the Pentagon to develop new screening and intervention protocols for military families. Martinez had become Emily's personal counselor during the transition period, helping her navigate the psychological challenges of reclaiming her original identity while maintaining the professional competence she had developed as Emily Johnson. "Sarah, excellent testimony in there. You've come so far from that first session when you could barely say Marcus's name out loud." Martinez's smile was warm and professional, reflecting the genuine care she brought to her work with trauma survivors. Emily appreciated the recognition of her growth, but she also understood that healing was an ongoing process rather than a destination to be reached. "I still have difficult days, but having a purpose larger than my own recovery makes the hard moments more bearable." They were joined by Sergeant First Class Maria Santos, who had been transferred to Washington to help implement the new family violence prevention protocols at military installations worldwide. Santos wore the relaxed confidence of someone who had found her calling in policy development rather than operational leadership. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that the ammunition SPECIALIST training program has incorporated domestic violence awareness into its curriculum. Every soldier who graduates from that program will know how to recognize signs of abuse and how to connect victims with resources. Your legacy is going to extend far beyond your personal story." The words carried special meaning for Emily, who had always worried that her deception might overshadow her contributions to military readiness and soldier safety. Knowing that her experience was being used to improve training and support for future soldiers provided validation that transcended personal vindication. As they prepared to return to the hearing room, Emily's phone buzzed with a text message from Corporal Jake Mitchell, who had been promoted to sergeant and was serving as an ammunition specialist instructor at Fort Rucker. The message contained a photo of his latest graduating Class 24 soldiers, who would carry the lessons of Emily's story into their own careers, and relationships. The afternoon session focused on implementation challenges and resource requirements for the new family protection protocols. Emily found herself drawing on both her personal experience and her operational expertise, explaining how policy changes needed to account for the realities of military deployment cycles, base housing limitations, and the unique stresses of military life. Senator Morrison asked the final question of the day. "Ms. Harrison, If you could speak directly to military families who might be experiencing domestic violence right now, what would you tell them? Emily looked directly into the cameras that would carry her words to military bases around the world, understanding that this might be the most important thing she would ever say. I would tell them that they are not alone, that their situation is not their fault, and that there are people who will believe them and protect them if they ask for help. I would tell them that the uniform worn by their abuser doesn't give that person the right to hurt them, and that true military honor includes protecting the most vulnerable members of our community. Most importantly, I would tell them that they have value and dignity that no one can take away, and that they deserve to live without fear. The hearing adjourned to sustained applause, but Emily remained focused on the individual faces in the gallery, some belonging to current service members, others to family members who had experienced their own struggles with military domestic violence. Each face represented a story, a family, a life that might be improved by the changes that had emerged from her own painful journey. Later that evening, Emily and her father shared dinner at a quiet restaurant near Capitol Hill, their first truly private conversation since the revelation of her identity 6 months earlier. The weight of official business and media attention had finally lifted, allowing them to exist simply as father and daughter reconnecting after years of assumed loss. "I'm proud of you, Sarah," General Harrison said, his voice carrying emotion. "That would have been inappropriate in professional settings. Not just for your service record or your testimony today, but for the courage it took to transform pain into purpose." Emily smiled, feeling the warmth of paternal approval that she had missed more than she had allowed herself to acknowledge. "I learned from watching you, Dad. You always taught me that leadership means taking responsibility for making things better, even when it's difficult or uncomfortable." They talked about the future, Emily's plans to pursue a commission and potentially attend graduate school, her father's approaching retirement, and his interest in continuing advocacy work as a civilian. They also talked about the past, filling in the details of the 3 years when they had believed each other to be lost forever. Conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Colonel Patricia Martinez, Emily's former base commander, who had been promoted and transferred to lead the new Military Family Protection Office at the Pentagon. Martinez had become both a professional mentor and a personal friend, helping Emily navigate the complex intersection of military hierarchy and family relationships. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Martinez said, approaching their table with the diplomatic caution of someone who understood the delicate nature of family reunions. "Not at all," Emily replied, gesturing toward an empty chair. "Please join us." Martinez sat down and produced a manila folder that Emily recognized as containing official military documents. "I wanted to deliver this personally rather than through normal channels. It's your new assignment orders, effective next month." Emily opened the folder to find orders assigning her to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point as an instructor in the Department of Systems Engineering, with a secondary assignment as liaison to the Academy's new Character Development and Leadership Excellence Program. The position represented an extraordinary opportunity for a junior enlisted soldier, reflecting both her exceptional performance record and her unique perspective on military ethics and leadership. "West Point?" Emily's voice reflected surprise and excitement in equal measure. "The Academy specifically requested you," Martinez explained. "They want someone who can teach cadets about the real-world implications of leadership decisions, particularly as they relate to taking care of soldiers and families. Your story has become part of the curriculum at every military leadership school in the country." Emily felt tears threatening at the corners of her eyes as she processed the magnitude of the opportunity. West Point represented the pinnacle of military education, the institution that had produced generations of Army leaders. Being selected to serve there as an instructor was an honor that typically required decades of experience and advanced education. "There's something else," Martinez continued, her voice carrying additional weight. "The Secretary of the Army has approved your application for a direct commission. If you accept the West Point assignment, you'll be promoted to second lieutenant and placed on a fast track for advanced military education. It's unprecedented for someone with your background, but your contributions to military family policy reform have been extraordinary." General Harrison reached across the table and took his daughter's hand, his pride evident in his expression despite his attempt to maintain professional composure. "Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career. You've earned it through exceptional service and personal sacrifice." Emily looked at the orders again, reading through the details of her new assignment with growing excitement. The position would allow her to combine her passion for military service with her commitment to preventing other families from experiencing the trauma that had defined her own journey. Teaching future Army officers about the importance of protecting soldiers and families felt like the perfect synthesis of her personal mission and professional expertise. "I accept," she said finally, her voice strong with conviction. "When do I start?" "You have 6 weeks to complete your transition from Forward Operating Base Viper and report to West Point for instructor orientation. The timing will allow you to participate in the graduation ceremony for your replacement's training class at Fort Rucker." Sergeant Mitchell specifically requested that you present certificates to the new ammunition specialists. The mention of Jake's request brought another wave of emotion. Despite the dramatic changes in her circumstances, Emily had maintained relationships with the soldiers who had served alongside her during her deployment. Their continued friendship represented the best aspects of military culture: loyalty, mutual support, and shared commitment to mission accomplishment. As dinner concluded, Emily walked with her father through the quiet streets of Washington, D.C., processing the magnitude of the changes that 6 months had brought to her life. The woman who had knelt beside an Apache helicopter, loading ammunition while hiding her true identity, had evolved into someone who could influence military policy at the highest levels of government. The tattoo on her shoulder blade no longer felt like a burden or a secret to be protected. Instead, it had become a source of strength, a reminder that Emily Johnson's sacrifice had enabled not just Sarah Harrison's survival, but her transformation into someone who could make a difference in the lives of others. 2 weeks later, Emily found herself back at Forward Operating Base Viper for her final rotation before transferring to West Point. The base had changed in subtle ways during her months in Washington. New procedures were visible everywhere, reflecting the policy reforms that had emerged from her testimony and the broader investigation it had triggered. Corporal Rodriguez, who had been promoted to sergeant and was now serving as the senior ammunition specialist, greeted Emily with the easy familiarity of someone who had served alongside her during the most dangerous periods of their deployment. "Good to have you back, Sarah," Rodriguez said, using Emily's real name with the casual acceptance that characterized military adaptation to changing circumstances. "The new protocols are working well. We've had 3 domestic violence reports in the past month, and all 3 families received immediate protection and support." Emily nodded, appreciating the concrete evidence that policy changes were translating into real-world improvements for military families. "How are the new ammunition specialists working out?" "Excellent. The training program changes you helped develop are producing soldiers who are both technically proficient and personally aware of their broader responsibilities. They understand that taking care of equipment and taking care of people are equally important parts of their mission." They walked together toward the armament bay where Emily had spent countless hours during her original deployment, the space that had provided structure and purpose during the most uncertain period of her life. The familiar smell of gun oil and metal polish triggered memories of early morning shifts and late-night maintenance sessions, times when the routine of technical work had provided refuge from the complexity of her personal situation. Staff Sergeant Shun appeared with a clipboard and the focused expression that Emily remembered from her original service at the base. "Sarah, welcome back. I have your final equipment inventory and transition briefing prepared. Plus, there's someone here who wants to see you." Emily followed Chun deeper into the armament bay, where she found Chief Warrant Officer Lisa Park examining a new ammunition loading system that had been installed during the recent base upgrades. Park looked up with the warm smile that had made her such an effective leader during combat operations. "Sarah, I heard you were back for your transition. How does it feel to be returning to the scene of the crime?" Park's tone was light, but Emily could hear the deeper significance in the question. "It feels like coming home," Emily replied honestly. "This place, these people, they represent the best of what the Army can be. The work we did here mattered, and the relationships we built have lasted beyond the deployment." Park nodded, understanding the complex mix of nostalgia and anticipation that defined military transitions. "I wanted to talk to you before you leave for West Point. The Pentagon is developing new training protocols for aviation ammunition specialists, and they want your input on technical requirements and safety procedures. Would you be willing to serve as a consultant on the project?" Emily felt a surge of professional pride at being asked to contribute to the technical aspects of her original military specialty. Despite the dramatic changes in her career trajectory, she valued her expertise in ammunition systems and wanted to ensure that future soldiers would receive the best possible training in those critical skills. "Absolutely. I'd be honored to help improve the training programs." Their conversation was interrupted by the distinctive sound of Apache rotors as a flight of helicopters returned from a mission in the northern sector. Emily watched through the bay windows as the aircraft touched down in formation, their crews emerging with the characteristic swagger of pilots who had just completed another successful operation. The sight triggered a complex mix of emotions: pride in the work she had done to support those missions, satisfaction in knowing that her technical expertise had contributed to bringing soldiers home safely, and anticipation for the new challenges that awaited her at West Point. Later that afternoon, Emily participated in a ceremony honoring the soldiers who had served at Forward Operating Base Viper during her deployment. The event was informal but meaningful, recognizing the contributions of personnel who were transferring to new assignments or completing their military service. Command Sergeant Major Williams presented Emily with a unit coin commemorating her service as an ammunition specialist, but the inscription had been specially modified to read Sarah E. Harrison in recognition of her true identity. The gesture was small but significant, representing official acknowledgement that her contributions had transcended the false identity under which they had been performed. "Specialist Harrison," Williams said, using Emily's current rank rather than the second lieutenant bars she would soon wear. "Your service here represents the best traditions of the United States Army. You've demonstrated that character and competence matter more than the name on a uniform, and you've shown that individual soldiers can make a difference in ways that extend far beyond their official duties." Emily accepted the coin with genuine emotion, understanding that it represented not just recognition of her personal service, but validation of the principle that military excellence could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. The woman who had arrived at Forward Operating Base Viper, carrying dangerous secrets, had evolved into someone whose story was now taught in leadership schools throughout the military. As the ceremony concluded, Emily found herself standing alone beside the Apache helicopter where her journey of revelation had begun 6 months earlier. The aircraft looked exactly the same: angular, purposeful, ready for war, but Emily's relationship to it had been fundamentally transformed by everything that had happened since General Harrison first noticed something familiar in her bearing. Tattoo on her shoulder blade no longer represented hidden pain and secret memorial. Instead, it had become a symbol of resilience, transformation, and the power of authentic service to transcend the circumstances of its origin. Emily Johnson's sacrifice had enabled Sarah Harrison's rebirth, But both identities had contributed to creating someone capable of making a lasting difference in the lives of others. 3 months later, Second Lieutenant Sarah Harrison stood before her first class of cadets at the United States Military Academy. Her instructor's uniform crisp and professional, despite the nervous energy that always preceded new teaching assignments. The classroom was filled with future Army officers whose decisions would someday affect thousands of soldiers and their families. "Good morning, cadets," Emily began, her voice carrying the confidence that had developed through months of congressional testimony and public speaking. "I'm Lieutenant Harrison, and I'll be teaching you about the intersection of technical competence and ethical leadership. Before we begin, I want you to understand that everything you learn in this classroom will someday be tested in situations where lives depend on your decisions." The cadets sat at attention, their young faces reflecting the serious dedication that had earned them admission to West Point. Emily could see in their expressions the same hunger for purpose and meaning that had driven her own military service. The desire to contribute to something larger than personal ambition or individual achievement. Today we're going to talk about a principle that isn't written in any technical manual but underlies everything we do as Army officers: the responsibility to protect not just the soldiers under our command, but their families as well. This responsibility extends beyond the battlefield into the most personal aspects of military life. Emily began to share her story, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a professional educator, using personal experience to illustrate universal principles of leadership and ethical decision-making. She spoke about the importance of creating command climates where vulnerable people felt safe to seek help, about the difference between loyalty to individuals and loyalty to institutional values, about the courage required to challenge systems and cultures that failed to protect the innocent. The cadets listened with rapt attention, understanding that they were receiving instruction that would shape their approach to leadership throughout their careers. Some asked questions about specific scenarios they might encounter as junior officers. Others inquired about resources and procedures for supporting military families in crisis. After class, Emily was approached by Cadet Rebecca Chun, a senior who was scheduled to graduate in 2 months and receive a commission as a second lieutenant. In the military police corps, Chun's expression reflected the serious intensity of someone grappling with complex moral and professional questions. "Ma'am, your story is inspiring, but it's also terrifying. How do we know that we'll have the courage to do the right thing when we're faced with similar situations? How do we prepare ourselves to challenge authority when institutional pressure supports the status quo?" Emily smiled, recognizing in the cadet's question the same uncertainty that had defined her own early military experience. "Cadet Chun, courage isn't something you either have or don't have. It's something you develop through practice. Start by making small ethical decisions correctly, by choosing integrity over convenience in situations where the stakes are low. Build the habit of doing what's right, even when it's difficult, and you'll find that you have the strength to make harder choices when they're required." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Emily sharing practical advice about leadership development, ethical decision-making, and the importance of building support networks within military communities. She found teaching to be deeply satisfying, combining her passion for military service with her commitment to preventing other families from experiencing the trauma that had shaped her own journey. As Emily walked across the West Point campus, after her final class of the day, she reflected on the extraordinary transformation that had brought her from a hidden identity on a desert airbase to a position of influence at the nation's premier military academy. The journey had been painful, dangerous, and ultimately redemptive, proving that authentic service could emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. The Gothic buildings of West Point rose around her like monuments to military tradition and honor, their stone facades bearing witness to generations of officers who had struggled with similar questions about duty, sacrifice, and the proper use of military power. Emily felt connected to that tradition in ways that transcended her unconventional path to officer status. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her father, who was completing his final months of active duty before retirement. The message contained a photo from his current assignment at the Pentagon, showing him meeting with a delegation of international military leaders who were studying American approaches to military family protection and domestic violence prevention. The image represented the global impact of the reforms that had emerged from Emily's story. Military organizations around the world were implementing similar programs, recognizing that protecting families was essential to maintaining effective military forces. Her personal trauma had become a catalyst for systemic change that would affect military families for generations to come. That evening, Emily sat in her quarters at West Point, working on lesson plans for the following week's classes while classical music played softly in the background. The room was spartanly furnished but comfortable, reflecting the disciplined lifestyle of a professional military educator. Photos on her desk showed friends from Forward Operating Base Viper, family members, and colleagues from her work in Washington, visual reminders of the relationships that had sustained her through the most difficult periods of her life. She paused in her work to trace the outline of the tattoo on her shoulder blade, no longer hidden beneath layers of uniform and deception, but openly acknowledged as part of her personal history. The dog tags and dates inked into her skin had become symbols of transformation rather than concealment, representing the journey from victim to survivor to advocate for others facing similar challenges. Emily's computer chimed with an email from Sergeant Jake Mitchell, now completing his own instructor training at Fort Rucker. The message included graduation photos from his latest ammunition specialist class, showing 24 soldiers who would carry forward the technical expertise and ethical awareness that had become integral to their training program. Sarah, Jake's message read, "Wanted you to see the latest graduates. Every one of them knows your story and understands that technical competence and personal integrity are equally important in military service. They're not just ammunition specialists, they're advocates for the soldiers and families they serve. Thank you for showing us what real leadership looks like." Emily smiled as she read the message, understanding that her legacy would be measured not just in policy changes or personal recognition, but in the daily actions of soldiers who had learned to see their technical duties as part of a larger mission to protect and serve their communities. The story opens with a young soldier at Forward Operating Base Viper in Afghanistan, methodically loading ammunition for Apache helicopters. To her fellow soldiers, she is simply another ammunition specialist doing her job with quiet competence. But beneath the surface lies a profound secret. This soldier is living under a false identity, having fled an abusive marriage through what amounts to military witness protection. Emily Johnson had legally died in a car accident years earlier. Her death staged to escape a violent husband whose connections and resources made traditional escape impossible. The woman now known as Sarah Harrison carries the weight of this hidden past while serving her country, believing that authentic identity and genuine service are mutually exclusive given her circumstances. The psychological burden of maintaining this deception while performing critical military duties creates constant tension. Every interaction with fellow soldiers, every official document, every moment of camaraderie is tainted by the knowledge that her very presence is built on a carefully constructed lie. Yet she continues to serve with dedication, finding purpose in the technical precision of her work and the knowledge that her efforts support combat operations that protect other soldiers' lives. The turning point comes during a routine ammunition loading operation when Sarah's supervisor, Sergeant Rodriguez, notices her exceptional technical knowledge and suggests she apply for officer candidate school. This moment of recognition forces Sarah to confront the fundamental contradiction of her existence. How can she accept advancement and leadership responsibilities while living under false pretenses? The suggestion triggers a crisis of conscience that has been building for years. Sarah realizes that her deception, while necessary for survival, has created a ceiling on her potential service. She cannot in good conscience accept positions of increased responsibility while hiding her true identity from the institution she serves. Yet revealing the truth carries enormous risks, including potential criminal charges for identity fraud, and the loss of the military career that has given her life meaning and purpose. During sleepless nights in her quarters, Sarah wrestles with impossible choices. Continued deception means accepting permanent limitations on her service and living with the constant fear of discovery. Truth-telling means risking everything she has built but potentially opening the door to authentic service and genuine relationships with fellow soldiers. After months of internal struggle, Sarah makes the decision to reveal her true identity to her commanding officer, Colonel Lisa Park. The conversation takes place in Park's office at Forward Operating Base Viper, with Sarah expecting immediate arrest and court-martial proceedings. Instead, she encounters something unexpected: institutional compassion and a willingness to explore solutions rather than simply enforce regulations. Colonel Park listens to Sarah's story with growing understanding of the impossible circumstances that had led to the identity deception. Rather than viewing Sarah as a criminal who had infiltrated the military, Park recognizes her as a soldier who had found a way to serve despite extraordinary personal obstacles. The colonel's response reflects the kind of leadership that prioritizes mission accomplishment and soldier welfare over rigid adherence to procedures. The revelation process extends beyond the initial conversation, requiring Sarah to provide detailed documentation of her original identity, the circumstances of her staged death, and the resources she had used to create her new identity. Each step of the process reinforces her vulnerability while simultaneously demonstrating the depth of her commitment to serving with integrity rather than continuing to live with deception. Rather than pursuing punitive action, Colonel Park and her superiors recognize Sarah's case as evidence of systemic failures in military family protection programs. The fact that a woman had felt compelled to fake her death to escape domestic violence reveals gaps in existing support systems and protection protocols. Sarah's story becomes a catalyst for examining how military institutions respond to family violence and support soldiers in crisis. The military's response evolves from individual case management to comprehensive policy review. Senior leaders recognize that Sarah's experience likely represents broader patterns of inadequate family protection and support services. Her willingness to come forward despite enormous personal risk provides an opportunity to address institutional shortcomings that might otherwise remain hidden. Investigations reveal that numerous military families have experienced domestic violence without receiving adequate support from existing programs. Sarah's case highlights the need for improved reporting procedures, enhanced victim protection services, and better coordination between military and civilian authorities. Her story transforms from individual crisis to institutional opportunity. For meaningful reform, Sarah's journey from hidden identity to public advocacy culminates in testimony before Congress about military, family protection, and institutional accountability. Her appearance before the House Armed Services Committee represents a complete transformation from the woman who had once believed that authentic service was impossible given her background. The congressional hearing room represents the highest levels of American democracy, with Sarah now speaking truth to power about institutional failures and necessary reforms. Her testimony combines personal narrative with policy recommendations, demonstrating how individual experience can inform systemic change when supported by courageous leadership and institutional willingness to evolve. During the hearing, Sarah faces questions from committee members representing diverse political perspectives, each testing different aspects of her story and recommendations. Her responses reflect years of preparation and deep understanding of both personal trauma and institutional dynamics. The testimony receives national media attention, elevating military family protection from a specialized concern to a matter of public policy debate. Following her congressional testimony, Sarah's military career accelerates in ways that would have been impossible while living under false identity. Promotions come based on merit, leadership potential, and contributions to military policy reform. Each advancement represents not just personal recognition, but validation of the principle that authentic service can transcend unconventional origins. Her progression from ammunition specialist to senior officer involves assignments that leverage her unique combination of operational experience, policy expertise, and advocacy skills. She completes advanced military education, earns a doctoral degree in organizational ethics, and serves in increasingly responsible positions that influence military culture and family protection policies. The trajectory from enlisted soldier to general officer typically requires decades of service and exceptional performance. Sarah's advancement occurs more rapidly due to her extraordinary contributions to military reform and her proven ability to translate personal experience into institutional change. Each promotion carries added responsibility for protecting other military families facing similar challenges. Sarah's advocacy work extends beyond American military institutions to influence international military organizations and allied forces. Her consulting work with NATO countries, European Union military forces, and other allied nations demonstrates how principles of ethical leadership and family protection can be adapted to different cultural contexts and operational environments. The international scope of her influence reflects the universal nature of the challenges she addresses. Military families worldwide face similar vulnerabilities to domestic violence and institutional neglect. Sarah's story provides a framework for understanding these problems and implementing solutions that respect cultural differences while maintaining core principles of protection and accountability. Her work with international organizations culminates in her appointment to senior positions with the United Nations and other global institutions. These roles allow her to influence military policy at the highest levels of international governance, extending family protection principles to peacekeeping operations and multinational military cooperation agreements. Throughout her professional transformation, Sarah also works to rebuild personal relationships that had been severed by her hidden identity and traumatic past. The reconciliation with her father, retired General Marcus Harrison, represents the restoration of family bonds that had been strained by military obligations and personal secrets. The development of her relationship with Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the researcher who had documented the impact of military family protection reforms, demonstrates how authentic relationships become possible when built on truth rather than deception. Their marriage represents the personal healing that accompanies professional success and public advocacy. These personal relationships provide emotional support for the demands of public service while also representing the kind of healthy family dynamics that Sarah's policy work seeks to protect for other military families. Her personal life becomes a model for the resilience and healing that institutional support can enable when properly implemented. 20 years after her initial revelation, Sarah serves as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest position in American military leadership. Her appointment to this role represents the complete transformation of both individual circumstances and institutional culture. The woman who had once hidden her identity while loading ammunition now influences military policy at the highest levels of government. The statistical evidence of her impact is overwhelming. Military family violence rates decline by nearly 80% across NATO countries, implementing the Harrison Protocols. Victim support services evolve from inadequate bureaucratic responses to comprehensive programs addressing immediate safety and long-term healing. Military culture transforms from institutional protection of harmful behavior to proactive prevention of family violence. her legacy extends beyond policy changes to include cultural transformation that makes military service more attractive to high-quality recruits and their families. Generational changes occur as children who grow up in protected military families bring healthier relationship models into military culture. The self-reinforcing cycle of improvement continues long after the initial reforms are implemented. Sarah's retirement from active military service leads to the establishment of the Sarah E. Harrison Foundation for Military Family Protection, ensuring permanent funding for research, victim support services, and policy advocacy. The Foundation's global scope reflects the international impact of her work and the continuing need for institutional vigilance in protecting vulnerable families. Board members include former military leaders, academic researchers, and survivor advocates from around the world, creating a network dedicated to maintaining and expanding family protection principles. The Foundation's work extends beyond military organizations to include civilian corporations and international development programs, demonstrating how ethical leadership principles can be applied across different institutional contexts. The Foundation's research programs continue documenting the effectiveness of family protection reforms while identifying emerging challenges that require policy innovation. Its advocacy work ensures that political and military leaders maintain their commitment to protecting families even as leadership changes and other priorities compete for attention and resources. The tattoo on Sarah's shoulder blade, which had once represented dangerous secrets and hidden pain, evolves into a symbol recognized worldwide for institutional transformation and individual resilience. Museums display replicas alongside exhibits about military family protection reform, ensuring that future generations understand the personal cost of authentic leadership. This symbolic transformation reflects the broader theme of the story: how individual trauma can be transformed into institutional healing when supported by courageous leadership and sustained commitment to change. The physical reminder of past pain becomes a source of strength and inspiration for others facing similar challenges. The symbol's global recognition represents the universal applicability of Sarah's story. Military families worldwide face similar vulnerabilities, and her example demonstrates how individual courage can create systemic change when supported by institutions willing to prioritize truth over convenience. Sarah's story becomes required reading at military academies worldwide, ensuring that future leaders understand the principles of ethical leadership and institutional accountability that her experience helped establish. Her doctoral dissertation on organizational ethics provides an academic foundation for practical policy implementation. The educational impact extends beyond military institutions to include civilian leadership programs, corporate training initiatives, and international development organizations. Her story demonstrates how authentic leadership principles can be applied across different contexts while maintaining core commitments to protecting the vulnerable and holding institutions accountable. The integration of her story into leadership education ensures that future generations of leaders understand that institutional change requires both individual courage and collective commitment. Her example provides a model for how personal experience can inform policy development when supported by rigorous research and sustained advocacy. The story concludes with Sarah's final visit to Forward Operating Base Viper, where her journey began 20 years earlier. The current ammunition specialist team operates according to protocols emphasizing both technical competence and ethical leadership, demonstrating how her legacy continues through the next generation of military personnel. The message from the young soldier stationed at the base represents the completion of a full circle from hidden identity to public symbol, from individual survival to institutional transformation, from personal trauma to collective healing. The woman who had once believed she had no voice, no future, and no chance to make a difference had learned that authentic service could transform not just individual lives but entire cultures. Her story proves that individual courage can create institutional change when supported by leaders willing to choose truth over convenience. The transformation from ammunition specialist to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff demonstrates that authentic service can transcend any background or circumstance when powered by unwavering commitment to protecting the vulnerable and holding the powerful accountable. The epilogue reveals the global scope of her impact: over 100,000 military family members protected through programs she helped create. Military family violence rates declining by 78%, and international adoption of family protection protocols by dozens of military organizations. These statistics represent not just policy achievements, but real families living in safety, real children growing up without fear, real soldiers able to focus on their duties knowing their loved ones are protected. She was loading Apache ammo, tells the story of how individual courage can create lasting institutional change when supported by ethical leadership and sustained commitment to reform. Sarah Harrison's journey from hidden identity to public advocacy demonstrates that authentic service can transcend any background or circumstance, and that personal trauma can be transformed into collective healing when channeled through proper institutional support. The story's power lies not just in its dramatic transformation, but in its practical demonstration of how change occurs within large, complex organizations. Military institutions, like all bureaucratic structures, resist change and protect existing power arrangements. Sarah's success required not just personal courage, but the support of leaders willing to prioritize truth over convenience and long-term reform over short-term stability. Her legacy extends far beyond military family protection to include broader principles of ethical leadership, institutional accountability, and protection of the vulnerable that can be applied across different organizational contexts. The story provides a model for how individual advocates can create systemic change, while demonstrating the importance of institutional support for sustainable reform. The transformation from hidden ammunition specialist to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff represents one of the most improbable career trajectories in military history. Yet every step was earned through authentic service, ethical leadership, and unwavering commitment to protecting others from experiencing the trauma that had once defined her own existence. Sarah Harrison's story proves that institutions can evolve, that individual courage can create lasting change, and that authentic service can triumph over any circumstances when powered by truth, supported by ethical leadership, and sustained by collective commitment to doing better. Sarah Harrison's transformation from hidden soldier to military leader shows that courage can overcome any obstacle. If you enjoyed this powerful story, please like this video and share it with someone who needs inspiration. Subscribe and hit the bell icon to never miss stories of real heroes who changed the world through determination and sacrifice. *.